Righto, ladies and gentlemen, boys, girls, and everybody in between. Resolute TV here. Part of what we're trying to do, obviously, over the next few months is there's going to be a lot of council elections, a lot of local elections, and with the amount of upheaval and crazy stuff that's been going on in 2020, I'm enthusiastic to see new blood jump into the political ring. We all know I'm a member of the Liberal Democrats political party, and I believe in freedom, liberty, and looking at things in a really different and a new way. And in the upcoming ACT elections, which is, I believe, a handful of weeks away, it's coming up rapidly, we've got four amazing top-line candidates, really good guys with really different life experience, and I'm going to try and hopefully interview one, two, three, or all, if they're motivated, of course, and ask them why they're involved in politics, because libertarians by nature are anti-political. If you saw my ranting video the other day, it's a big concept people misconstrue, but we have to be in the conversation. It is important that we're in the conversation. And so I've been joined this morning by a young bloke who I actually met during my last campaign run, and he come on board as a volunteer, and he was an amazing help for a few days, and I really appreciated his help. So I'm glad that he's sort of now taken the next step and put himself in the ring. I believe it takes a lot of courage to run as a candidate in any political election, even for the people who I disagree with on many things. It does take courage to put yourself out there and stand up for what you believe in the public sphere, because no matter what you believe in, there is going to be somebody who's going to detract and hate on what you've got to say, and you've got to have pretty thick skin. So allow me to introduce Matthew Knight, the Liberal Democrat candidate for Brindabella. How are you, Matt?
Going pretty well, thanks, Dean.
Mate, I really appreciate you coming on. You've been in Canberra for 20 years. 20 years, long time to be in Canberra. I was there for about 7. I did my apprenticeship there. It is a good city, but far too many politicians. You've been active in the Liberal Democrats for about 3 years, and now you're running for the seat of Brindabella. You're an advocate for individual liberty, and you believe that everybody is better off and society is far more prosperous when the size of government is limited to a very moderate size. Matthew also believes that Canberrans should be free to live their life, free from interference from government. Mate, is that a fair introduction?
Yeah, it sounds good. Captured me pretty well.
Mate, look, I really, obviously we share a lot of the same beliefs and a lot of the same philosophies, and there is a spectrum to these things, but I certainly agree with everything you've sort of stated as who you are and what you stand for, and I think it's a very noble cause to defend freedom and liberty, not just of yourself, but of others, and that's where many people get confused.
Well, that's what we do at the Liberal Democrats. We're for everyone to have liberty, essentially.
100%, mate. So that I've got a couple of questions. We want to keep these things fairly trim, fairly fresh, because here's something I've noticed over the years is people have a really short attention span, and they don't want to listen to political people drone on with shit for hours and hours and hours. What they want to do is they kind of want to get in and get the message and go from there. So, mate, what do you believe is the role for the ACT government?
Well, I believe all government essentially has 3 basic responsibilities. They need to be able to provide law and order, or law and justice. They need to maintain public infrastructure, and they need to provide a very basic social safety net. I feel that in all 3 of these areas, the ACT government has essentially failed. We have the lowest number of police officers per capita in any state or territory in Australia. This has resulted in very high call-out rates for police officers. In addition, we have just terrible waiting times for hearings in courts. So, yeah, that's first off. They failed to provide the first primary service they're supposed to provide, which is law and justice. The second service, maintaining public infrastructure. You just need to drive on Canberran roads to see all the potholes and how long it takes them to fix those potholes, to see that they've failed on the second service they're supposed to provide. And the basic social safety net is another failure. Over 800 days waiting list on average to get into public housing. This is something that the ACT government has the responsibility to provide. Basic social basic social services like public housing for people who would otherwise be homeless or stuck in a house with a domestic abuser. 800 days is just totally unacceptable for that. So with all of these things, the Liberal Democrats propose solutions to just help address them. So for police officers, we just propose to stop the enforcement of victimless crimes. This would free up so much more police resources to enforce crimes where there are victims, so violent crimes and robbery, where the government really should be intervening. And well, obviously, if there's less victimless crimes like drug crimes, it would take a lot of pressure off the courts as well, and just really reduce waiting times for hearings. With social housing, we propose that the government stop acting as a property investor and a real estate agent and just sell its public housing stock and instead replace it with a system of means-tested rent assistance, rather than having to wait to get into a social housing, except for in really severe circumstances. Perhaps there should be a few houses maintained, owned by the ACT government, but for most circumstances, when someone is at risk of becoming homeless or in being trapped in an abusive relation or in a household with an abuser, we would much prefer that they get rental assistance while they are in one of these situations. Sorry, I went on to a bit of a ramble.
No, that's the idea, mate. We want to know what's happening in your mind. If you're going to be elected as the Brindabella representative, you know what? The people elect you, and they want to know what you think. And I'd say that what you've just mentioned is very important. So I get questioned an awful lot, and I had a lot of experience in this period where, so all you libertarians want to abolish everything, and it's sort of like, yeah, look, in 100 years' time in utopia, yes, the Liberal Democrats is where we like to promote the concepts that head in the general direction of. Nobody thinks that we're going to click our fingers and all of a sudden have a perfect police force, and we don't think we're going to click our fingers and have all welfare abolished. Although I think long term the majority of us would like to see nobody needing welfare, and instead of going, well, how do you solve that? Instead of us just going, well, we'll just abolish welfare, which I say that all the time. Just abolish it, does my head in. I'd rather empower the people to not need it. And there's always the conversation that follows on from saying, and I say outrageous things. That's one of my things. But when I say something like abolish all welfare, I don't mean tomorrow. But we need to be driving society to where people don't need it or people don't want it. And I sort of think that's what you're heading to here. The police arresting people for smoking marijuana, or things along those lines. Obviously, the ACT has very good cannabis laws relative to the rest of the country, which relatively. But you sort of think to yourself, do we really need our police force wasting its time on these types of things when there are murderers, rapists, and people who are out there actually hurting people and violating people's rights? I think that's fairly
resources. Exactly. It's just a waste to have police officers focusing on drug crimes while there are these things going on. It doesn't make sense that the government would have them enforce these things.
No, and people would argue with you that the enforcing of drug crimes stops the people using drugs from hurting others. I would argue sort of the other way, that we can't arrest people on the theory that they may hurt somebody. We need to sort of go, well, until they do, they haven't committed any sort of a crime whatsoever. Imagine if you or I were arrested for thinking the wrong things. We need to have that person arrested or stopped. To me, it's a scary slope. It's why I guess Liberal Democrats are against things like mandatory bike helmet laws. We trust in people's ability to make their own decisions, make their own mistakes, and as a government, it's really only their job to make sure that the people are informed and understand what's going on for them. So I think it's important that we tackle things from the perspective of we can't pre-arrest people for crimes they may commit while on drugs. That seems a bit totalitarian to me, Matt.
Oh, definitely totalitarian.
Mate, so look, one of the topics of the upcoming Canberra election, or the ACT election, is stamp duty and rates. Now, there's a fairly different system of stamp duty and rates in Canberra to what there is in, well, the rest of Australia. Mate, tell me about it. What are your thoughts? Where are you at? What are your concerns, and how do you propose we do a better job?
Well, at the moment, the Labor Greens government has been moving to abolish stamp duty, which is the tax paid for transferring property, and to replace it with an increase in rates. That is the tax for owning property. Now, the Liberal Democrats, well, we oppose taxes. We don't really want to just lower one to raise another. It doesn't sort of make sense to us, especially given that this reform has meant that Canberra's became the highest taxed state or territory in Australia. The solution proposed by the Liberals for this policy has been to freeze rates as they are now. To freeze rates was a policy of the Liberal Democrats in the 2016 election before this recent rise. So it's good that they're copying our policies, but I mean, it's a bit too little too late. So now that rates have been raised, the Liberal Democrats propose lowering them back to the 2016 level, where we initially proposed that they be frozen. The whole issue of getting rid of stamp duty to replace it with higher rates it doesn't make sense to me. I mean, you have people with fixed incomes like pensioners, particularly, who they've already owned their home. They've got a very low and a fixed income on the pension or on their superannuation payments, and you want to raise the rates. I mean, that just makes it so much harder for them to stay in their home. It's going to force them to move. The other issue, of course, is anyone who already owns a house has paid stamp duty. So if they have to pay that stamp duty on top of the increased rates, they're essentially being taxed double. It's not a smart reform, I don't think.
Well, I think as far as a smart reform goes, it depends on your motivation. If your motivation is to squeeze more and more people for more and more tax, it's a very smart reform. If you're actually trying to lower the cost of living so people can live better lives on their own dollar and under their own auspices, it's a very poor policy. It is interesting to me, and it's been interesting to me since I got involved, because many years ago, I sort of used to vote. Well, I started out voting Labor as a kid. You know, you're for the workers. I come from a working class family, and I'm unashamedly working class. But then I sort of gradually started opening businesses and learning stuff. And I went, oh, hang on, I think maybe I'm more Liberal Party. And it was a bit of a progression. And then I got into there and I went, hang on, these guys don't actually back up anything they say. And then I discovered the Liberal Democrats. But what I've noticed, and I'm sure you've noticed the same thing, is it's quite amazing how quickly these other parties adopt our policies in and around. And I don't mind, because our policies are great. If the Liberal Party, as an example, adopted most of our fiscal policies, the Liberal Democrats wouldn't need to exist.
Yeah,
I believe. if the parties actually stood for the things they stood for, the Liberal Democrats as a party would have no tangible purpose. But because they don't, here we are fighting the good fight. Mate, I actually think, as far as the rates and things go, I think you're on the money. Again, abolish all of it, but for now, let's try and repeal. Let's take baby steps. Let's say, most people don't realise that across Australia annually, there's over 125 different types of taxes that Australians pay in various stamp duties and rate and agriculture tax on this and GSTs and all the rest of them. It actually tallies up to over 125 according to the Treasury website. And I just think to myself, well, if you weren't doing anything shady, why would you need so many different taxes? How about you just go, a consumption tax of 20% or a whatever? That would be my challenge for that. Unfortunately, we like to hide things in 120 different myriads of a maze of paperwork, so nobody quite knows how much they're getting ripped off. Mate, one of the next big topics in and around ACT and Canberra. Mate, have you got a policy or a platform on public transport in the Canberra light rail? That's fairly new. I actually haven't visited Canberra since the whole light rail went in. Well, I have, but I haven't been in, like, not a proper visit, if you know what I mean, a couple of flying visits, but I haven't really interacted with the public transport system there for quite some time. Mate, tell me about it.
Well, I mean, as people in Tuggeranong can tell you, the public transport system has gotten far worse since the introduction of the Canberra light rail. So many services have been cut last year with the introduction of the light rail. It's essentially just a point-to-point, just the north side. I mean, even then, the whole cost-benefit analysis that encouraged the light rail to go ahead, it showed that it would produce $1.20 worth of benefit for every dollar spent on this tram. The Auditor General's department actually had a look at this cost-benefit analysis, and her conclusion was it's more like 49 cents for every dollar spent on it. So it's a social loss-making project. This mainly occurred because they double counted as benefits the increased land cost, whereas the land cost is increasing because of the other benefits generated by the tram. It's essentially just a big white elephant for Gungahlin. And as ratepayers in Tuggeranong, we're paying for it. So they might enjoy it. It's not good for us, and it's losing the city in just paying them $1 for just giving everyone money in Northside would produce $1 worth of social benefits for the city. So it's half as good as just paying people. But yeah, and the extension for it to Woden, I mean, they haven't shown us any cost-benefit analysis for that either. So who knows whether it will be beneficial? I mean, history shows it might not be. So as a policy, the Liberal Democrats oppose the extension of this light rail. We would suggest to just give the money to either to help fund tax cuts, or to help boost bus services through Action buses. Either or, but they'd both be better than extending light rail.
I mean, it's arguable from all of our we just look for practical solutions that don't cost the taxpayer $1 squillion. And we saw similar problems with the light rail in the middle of Sydney. It's shut down all sorts of business. It's been an absolute nightmare for people. In my opinion, I would have to say that what these ongoing light rail things prove is that governments shouldn't be running public transport systems or infrastructure projects where they're in complete control. We really need private business people who are fairly efficient, who would get in and go, the government goes, right, we've got this plan, we're going to build a light rail system. How do we make it work? So what they tend to do is they employ, on the taxpayer dollar, a whole bunch of consultants and all sorts of lunatics who consult, give their ideas, their opinions, whatever. And I'm sure most of them have never built a practical working railway or light rail situation unless they've done it on modelling, and you can imagine all these people with their train systems at home talking about how good their system will be. I think it should be sort of farmed out to a professional who goes, look, okay, here you go. This is the best way to make it work. This is how it works. It's worked here. It's worked here. It's worked here. It's worked here. This is what we need to do. What they seem to do is, look, I'm sure there's a lot of nepotism involved, and we end up with these great big white elephants that cost the taxpayer a fortune because governments are never as responsible with other people's money as they would be with their own. I usually sort of work off the narrative. As a politician, if you were paying for this out of your pocket, how would you go about it? And the answer is arguably very different to how they go about it using the taxpayer dollar, mate.
Oh, definitely. They wouldn't have gone ahead with the tram if they were paying for it themselves.
Exactly, mate. And it would be nice if they had some tangible input into, or a personal input into these things, mate. Okay, here's another interesting one, and we've got a few of our people sending in the odd question, and fireworks in the ACT. Sorry if I'm blinking. If I'm blinking a lot, it's a big hay fever day out here, pollen wise, and it's one of my kryptonites, hay fever. So The eyes are a bit puffy and a bit swollen. I'm not as pretty as I usually am, Matt. So fireworks returning to the ACT. I remember as a kid, I think they should be bringing fireworks and cracker night back to the whole country. I had an amazing time as a kid running around, setting fire to things and having bonfires and, all these sorts of things. And I don't see any reason why we couldn't bring it back. What are your thoughts, mate?
I think we should definitely bring them back. Of course, everyone who grew up in Canberra before 2009 remembers Cracker Night. Twice a year, both Queen's birthday and New Year's. It was a tradition that everyone would have their own private fireworks show. But since 2009, the Labor government's banned them because of a few individuals who were being disruptive. Rather than just punishing these individuals, they thought they should punish all of Canberra and take our fireworks away. The Liberal Democrats really do support bringing back the tradition of Cracker Night in the ACT. And if there are individuals being disruptive, as there were before 2009, they should be punished individually rather than punishing the whole city.
Yeah. Now, as a question regarding individuals being disruptive, do you, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot here because this is a friendly interview, obviously, mate, what counts as disruptive enough a behaviour for politicians to go, sorry, we're banning an entire city from having a good time because somebody's been disruptive? Have you got any examples of the sort of thing that caused that decision?
One of the examples given by the government was people shooting crackers at domestic animals. So I think definitely those people could be punished individually under our existing laws on animal abuse rather than banning fireworks from a whole city.
Yeah, mate. Well, I don't know any Liberal Democrat that thinks it's a good idea to torture animals. We all live with the no harm principle. Therefore, animals count, don't hurt them. There is no need to. So, people who do those sorts of things should certainly be dealt with. I'm not sure that warrants punishing an entire city, or in the case of all of Australia. People that torture the sort of people who torture animals are the sort of people I sort of believe that would torture animals with or without firecrackers.
It takes away one of the methods, but it doesn't take away everything.
No, look, as shown by knife violence in Great Britain, how quickly there's no gun violence is really low in London, but stabbings are like God off the planet. There's an underlying issue here, and it's not the weapon of choice. It's the behaviour of the individual, and it's what motivates them to behave in the way that they do. Mate, and obviously I don't want this to go forever, so I've got one more question here for you, and I'd like to take the time to do, for you to work through it, because it's a fairly complicated issue. It's an important issue, mate. On a complicated level, on a Commonwealth level, do you support territory rights? How do you see that playing?
Well, it's an interesting question because at the moment the ACT doesn't have essentially the same rights as any of the states. Any law we introduce can be reversed by the federal government. Essentially, the ACT government just governs the ACT, which is technically Commonwealth territory rather than the ACT territory for the Commonwealth government. Now, this has meant that in the ACT, of course, we were the first jurisdiction to legalise same-sex marriage, and that was reversed by the Commonwealth government. Similarly, back in the 90s, the Northern Territory was the first jurisdiction to legalise voluntary assisted dying, which was also reversed by the federal government. Now, both same-sex marriage and voluntary assisted dying are things that are broadly popular in both of the territories, but we aren't essentially allowed to legislate or legalise them for ourselves because the federal government doesn't like them. Now, if elected to the Legislative Assembly, I do think that the Legislative Assemblies of both the ACT and Northern Territory should lobby the Commonwealth government a lot harder to get essentially to be granted essentially more rights to essentially be able to govern ourselves the same as any of the states are allowed to govern themselves, rather than having this sort of limbo of self-government, but not if the Commonwealth government tells us we can't have it.
Yeah. No, look, and the issues you've mentioned, they're big issues. The right to die, the same-sex marriage thing. They're all massive issues for people, but for some reason we've got this bureaucracy and these politicians and the government telling people how to make these very personal decisions or what's acceptable and what's not. I'm not a gay man. I have no interest in marrying you, although you're a very handsome fellow. But in the event that I did wish to do that, I don't see any justification for government involvement. That would be a decision between myself and yourself, or two gay men, two gay women. It just baffles me that this is the sort of thing that our governments think they have any business involving themselves in. In saying that, I look at the whole marital system, to be fair, and one of my more outlandish viewpoints is that I love you so much that I need to get the government to approve it so that if I die, I get half your stuff. How did they manage to get themselves involved in marriage? I don't understand. I love you so much, I need the government's permission to tell them. What? To me, that's just baffling, and it drives me a little bit crazy. But, mate, look, we're coming up to the 30-minute mark, which is what I'm hoping to do for all these candidates that we're working with. Mate, for the next minute and a half, and I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit for this one, but I think you're a smart enough guy, and I think you're an excellent candidate. I'm really, really happy you're competing. Why should people vote for you in Canberra? Why should people support the Liberal Democrats? Because many people miss the point that, you're a part of a party, and our party has philosophies, and we have more principles, as far as I'm concerned, than the rest. Tell us why people should vote for Matthew Knight.
Well, if elected to the crossbench, if elected to the Legislative Assembly, a Liberal Democrat would quite likely control the balance of power on the crossbench. We would be able to use this position to encourage both the Liberal and Labor Party to adopt policies that would help give back the freedoms to Canberrans. So crack a night and help decriminalise drugs as well, and everything else. We'd also be able to let you keep more of your money. We would pressure both sides of government, both the Liberal and Labor Party, to lower rates and, well, keep stamp duty where it is for now, but lower your rates back to 2016 and try to claw our way back from the highest taxed state or territory in Australia.
Simplify living for the Australian people, and specifically for you, the ACT people. Matthew Knight, thank you. This is your first public interview too. So, mate, I think you've done a fantastic job. It's not as easy as people seem to think. I think you've done an excellent job. You're very, very well spoken. You understand some of these serious key issues. Mate, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for participating. And I hope the Canberran people are clever enough to vote you in, mate. So all the best in the election. And thank you very much. We'll talk soon.
Thanks for having me. Talk soon.